So what we're going to try and look at today is a little bit about carbon footprinting, because as an organisation, we work predominantly with the leather industry, the footwear industry, and lots of other industries, and we try to advise them on sustainability issues. So it's a sort of good idea if perhaps we ought to do it ourselves as well. And so, a couple of years ago, we thought, well, we really need to look at ourselves and make sure we know what we're doing and try and improve our own, our own sustainability within the work context. And at the end of the day, let's be honest, all businesses have to make money, don't they? And it's no good having the most sustainable glove or shoe or handbag if it's going to cost you an arm and a leg to do it and to meet the criteria. So we've got to do all these things in balance. And we talk about the people, planets, and the whole business side of things. Everything has to balance. So, but we still have to take steps, and we can't just sit still. So essentially, it's been mentioned a number of times today, the whole thing about the world we live in. Rosie just mentioned, the effects of climate change on all sorts of things. So we see these news stories more and more coming through, of natural disasters, of fires. I dispute anybody who still can say there's no climate change impact. The graph, the sort of coloured stripe across the bottom, this takes us from 1850 up to actually 2023, and it shows the deviation away from average temperatures for those years. And as you can see, it's getting hotter and hotter, and 2023 was the hottest year for our planet. So we can't deny that something is actually happening, and we need to sort of take some control to try and reduce and reverse if possible. So in 2015 there was the Paris Agreement, it was at COP21, that they basically tried to say that we should limit the amount that the planet is increasing in temperature to a maximum of 2 degrees above pre-industrialized levels, and really less than that. That's really a high limit. So many countries have got net zero targets that they want to try and follow. And again, we put in these dates and we hope something's going to happen, but it really does take concerted effort, and it does mean starting a long time ago, actually. So then we have legislation in place, we have consumer pressure. There's lots of things that make this challenging to us, but I say we've always got to start with the first step, haven't we? So the picture on here now is published by the Greenhouse. It's the Greenhouse Protocol, which is basically a global standard that provides a framework for measuring and reporting on greenhouse gas emissions. So things like carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and all the other greenhouse gases. Now, if you take SATRA, so if you look in the middle of the diagram there, that's us in the middle. That's the organisation, and we're going to look at all the things that impact us and impact our carbon footprint. And the trouble is, there's lots of other people that impact us as well. So you have your upstream activities, maybe all the people who are supplying us and all the people who are supplying us with our fuel and so forth, and then we have the downstream impact again, where we're further down the line where we perhaps can't influence so much. So we talk about different scopes. There's 3 different scopes of emissions, and Scope 1 is probably the relatively easy one, in that it's what we do ourselves. It's what we do in-house, and therefore, in theory, we can control that, or at least we can start to look at it and see how we can improve it. Scope 2 is things like emissions from things like energy that we again purchase. Somebody earlier was mentioning, I think it was Richard from Gen Phoenix, saying about they 100% have renewable energy sources that they purchase. We're not at that point yet. We had a strange situation, actually. For those of you who know SATRA, we're based in Kettering, and we're not that far from the Kettering General Hospital. We have 2 buildings, and one of them we wanted to look at putting solar panels onto the roof, because we thought that would be a good move. And ironically, the council came to us and said, can't do that. Why not? Because we think you might generate too much power, and you might take out the grid, and you might take out the hospital. And they were serious. And we went, you know what, this is a bit weird. And they said, no, sorry, you can't do it. Can't do it. Now you've got to look at other things that you can do. But we think the risk actually, and we said, well, we've got all these other mechanisms in place to make it. So, no, can't do it. Bizarre. Anyway, scope 3 is a bit of everything else, really. It's the things we purchase. Now we make, for example, people perhaps think of us as being a test house, but actually a big part of what we do is make equipment, test equipment, which we supply around the world. So actually we are a manufacturer. People forget that bit. So obviously we are purchasing, and we are purchasing products as well. So, there's all our supply chain, the people who are supplying us with our engineering products. Business travel. Now we work in 76 different countries. If you ever want a company that's got a high business travel bill, that's SATRA. Even COVID. I mean, COVID obviously made a huge impact, and that's made us again really look critically at our travel. But there's a high bill there, and things like, say, waste. Again, we have to test people's products. So our waste, we're not allowed to give those products away because they've been tested. They might now be dangerous. So we have this whole problem of how we dispose of our own waste in terms of all the testing samples we receive. And when you think we don't just do footwear, what you perhaps don't know is we do things like furniture, when you've got beds and mattresses. So we generate a lot of waste, even as a test house. And then freight and transportation. Say again, we are transporting test equipment all around the world to laboratories, who are buying from us. So all of those things are still quite difficult for us because a lot of those things we don't have a huge influence over. So what do we? Well, so where do we get the data from? Well, there's things we can do, and obviously where you've got your fuel bills, you've got your various utilities. One thing we found was the amount of refrigerants that we were using, because we have a lot of air conditioning. A lot of our laboratories have to be air conditioned or controlled. Company cars, we don't have a lot of company cars, but we do have company cars. So again, but all of those things we can sort of get the numbers, because all this is about numbers, really, is it? Because if you don't know what you're doing now, you don't know how you can improve it. It's all this thing about measuring it so you can make the improvements, isn't it? And we've been trying to get more details from our people who provide things to us where we can. And we certainly started looking a lot at business travel, because again, we can start to measure the impact of that. We even had a survey with staff as to where they were, who drives to work, who comes by bike, how far do you travel. So we started to even look on an individual basis of how our own staff are moving around. So then there's, how do you actually calculate the impact? Now, I quite like this because in the UK, DEFRA, they've published conversion factors so that you can start to look at on emissions. And there's various statistics that have come from the Office for National Statistics. But here they start to make things into the equivalent of smartphone charges. And I think it's good because it's something you can relate to, isn't it? And so 1 kilowatt of electricity, it gives you the kilograms, CO2 equivalent, 0.207. So you can work that bit out. But that's equivalent in real terms to 25 smartphone charges. So you can visualize that now, can't you? So when you go, okay, we're going to go on from Heathrow to Bangkok, a return flight on premium economy, and that is actually 551,163 smartphone charges. That's quite a big impact, isn't it? And that's one person, one flight. So, we're starting to look now at, all these numbers. And to give you a little bit of perspective of shoes, because that's mainly what we're dealing with, a typical pair of shoes will have an impact of around 15 kilograms of CO2 equivalent, or 1,825 smartphone charges. So that's how we're sort of thinking. Trying to relate it to something that people can understand helps to roll this out across your business. Also, organisations do have an obligation nowadays. There's more and more legislation coming in. There'll be a whole raft of things coming through that, as probably most of us are quite aware of. Very large organisations have obligations to report on their emissions. Now you can say, oh, well, SATRA doesn't come into that category. We're not that big. But the problem is the big organisations are eventually going to knock their way back because they need to go down their chain. So even if you're not a big organisation, at some point you're going to be asked your data. And so you might as well start thinking about it now if you're not already doing it, and starting to actually collate information, because it's like a lot of things in life. Once you start looking at something critically, it also actually helps you improve, and it actually helps you start saving money because you actually now know what you're doing, you know where you're wasting, and so forth. So just to give you a little bit about SATRA's journey, because I think so we haven't really been doing it that long in the scheme of things. In April 2022, the only thing we knew about was, well, what we spent on energy. I mean, that's pretty poor, really, isn't it? If you think it's only 2 years ago. But, you know, you've got to start somewhere, and that's the important bit. You've got to make the decision and start. So in May, we then started working. There's a company called Xtons. It just happened to be the people who supplied the platform that we put all our data into and do all the number crunching. And we found they work. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of other organisations out there, so I'm not sort of trying to promote one particular organisation, but you just need somewhere where you can put all these numbers and make sense of them. Excuse me. So by October 2022, we'd actually then completed our first carbon footprint for 2021, and we'd tried to cover as best we could all 3 scopes. But of course, there's going to be gaps, but it's a start. And obviously, we're now looking into, we did 2022s, and we're now obviously working 2024, looking at last year's data. And now we're starting to see some numbers where you can see progress. So that's quite useful because, you know, you've got to have a couple of years running before you get to that point. So I don't know if you can see on the little graph on the table on the side there and looking at the graph. So if we looked at this, we've measured here, this is scope 1 and scope 2 figures. And you can see if we look at the totals, actually in 2021, we were looking at 650 as our the figure for 2021, now reduced down to 449. So that's quite a big difference in 2 years, just by consciously looking at you know, what we're doing. So that's actually equivalent. We've worked out to burning 224 tons of coal that we've saved, or 1.1 million miles in an average petrol car. So, you know, with a lot of driving, or go back to lovely smartphones. You know, we've saved 29.6 million phone charges. It all counts, doesn't it? It's all going somewhere. So suddenly we're starting to feel, you know what, we're getting the hang of this. This is actually quite good. There's a few key points. I'm going to give you a few examples of some of the things we've done, because as we're all saying all this, we go, well, what actually have you really done in practice? Well, the first one here, we implemented an energy monitoring system at our main site that gives us visibility in real time of how much electricity is coming into the building and where it's being consumed. So again, we're quite a complex organisation. So you know, it's not evenly spread, the power usage through the building. This allows us now to monitor very quickly any changes. Now, Martin's here from our chemistry. Where's Martin? Anyway, he's going to hide now. In our chemistry department, now chemistry, you know, all these restricted substances we have to look at. So we have a very large analytical chemistry lab. And sometimes we need humidity and temperature control for some of the tests we have to do, but not always. And we discovered that actually we didn't need those controls as much as we thought we did. So for a week, they switched off the humidity control to see what would happen. And the drop in energy consumption for that 1 week was about 30%. And that was equivalent to 7% of our total energy consumption in that entire site. So we then started looking at the tests, and we've got to obviously meet the requirements for doing the tests correctly. But we found that when we had to do the specific tests, we could then actually put the test pieces in a conditioned environment and transfer them to the chemistry lab to carry out the test, as long as it was done in a controlled way in a certain time. And that has now made the ability now, and we still meet our UCAS accreditation. So that has made a huge difference. Also, we looked at things like air conditioning and heating. Now, there's always this argument, is we've got a lot of open plan offices. It's never right for anybody. So, you know, you're never going to get it right. Do you know what our executive did? They bought everybody fleeces to wear. They said, anybody wants a fleece? You can, you know what, I thought it was brilliant. Because those of us like me who like to be warm, you get your fleece on. Those of you, you know, it's like a sauna in here. You just don't buy one, do you? Just don't have one. So that was a huge thing to do. But as well as that, we also dropped the temperatures and we turned them off for longer periods, etc. Other things were actually just looking at investment in new equipment, new modern, more more efficient equipment, which were for cooling and heating part of the building, and also for new fume cabinets in the chemistry department, because again that was a source of high energy use. Really important one we found, which somebody just suddenly one day thought, was compressed air leaks. I don't know how many people use compressed air. Well, we found that was immense. Just by having something that was not fixed, the amount of energy that's saved by getting those compressed air leaks sorted. That was something that we were really amazed by. And just simple things like you do at home, you know, tell your kids to turn the lights off, you know. People get fed up with it, but you know what? That's obviously got, I know that one. But, you know, just getting people out of the habit of just walking out of a room and leaving the lights on. Nighttime, you know, actually, do you need to have your computer on overnight? You're not in the office, just turn it off, you know. So it's really simple things. So we know, you know, we have seen a significant drop by doing little things, and it's all those little things, you know, that start to achieve. So I'm not saying we're anywhere near perfect. I say, it says I've been here, it won't be perfect the first year particularly, because you're scratching around thinking, well, what can I do? I mean, one thing we did is get staff involved. So we had suggestion schemes and people coming up with all sorts of ideas of what we could look at, which was great. But also sometimes you've got to make some assumptions, you know, and as, for example, it says here, you know, when you look at your suppliers, you might have hundreds of suppliers, but, you know, we sort of said, well, probably X% provides us with, you know, Y% of our products. Just focus in where you can, you know, it's still better than nothing. And the main thing is then say to start tracking your data through the year, and say small things have huge impacts. And the one thing we said, basically putting anything on a plane, whether it be a piece of test equipment or a human being, is immense. Today we've got Zoom going on in the background here. You know, we do know there are other ways you can do things. Nothing beats face-to-face, but you don't have to have it all the time. And things like, you say, refrigerants, air conditioning, practicalities, and Will saying, shut up. So on that basis, I will. Thank you.